Hello and a warm welcome to Cambridge Ed Live. You're watching The Value of Relationships, Tackling Teacher Retention. Before we get started, please tell us in the comment section where in the world you are watching from. My name is Lynn Dale. I work for Cambridge Assessment Admissions Testing as a Senior Assessment Manager for the Cambridge Personal Styles Questionnaire, or CPSQ for short. You'll be hearing a little bit more about that later. Admissions testing do a lot more than admissions testing, and we are collaborating on a much needed project to research the impact of relationships and personal capability or personal styles on trainee teacher retention. The aim of the project is to identify at-risk trainees to better target relational support and maybe other types of support. Data collection on this project has included use of interviews and assessments. We have used a relationship proximity tool, sociomapping, and the CPSQ. I'm going to go around each partner in turn involved in the project, and they will introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Alison.
Hello, I'm Alison Fox. I'm a senior lecturer at the Open University.
And Kate.
Kate Snyder-Nichols, course leader for Suffolk Norfolk SCITT.
And Rob.
Robbo, Chief Executive of the Relationships Foundation, former teacher and senior leader and professional tutor in schools.
Great, thanks Rob. Our agenda over the next hour is to introduce the project so you can put questions to the panel. Kate will begin by explaining the background to the project. Rob will talk about the value of relationships and how they can be measured. I will cover CPSQ and why individual capability was included in this particular project. Alison will reveal some of our findings today using extracts from 2 training case studies. So if we can start with Kate, if you could please explain the rationale for this work.
Thank you. Suffolk Norfolk SCITT, school-centred initial teacher training. We're based in Suffolk and Norfolk in the east of England. We're one of the largest SCITTs in the country, and we train teachers for 1 year so that they gain their PGCE and QTS and can become qualified teachers in either primary or secondary schools. We've always strived to personalise our teacher training programmes with strong support from our tutors and our partnership schools so that our trainees receive the best possible outcomes. We had already completed some of our own research on groups within training cohorts, such as career changers, trainees who are parents of young children, and those straight from university. However, we thought we could do more and know more about what would help our trainees to become successful and resilient teachers. So in 2017, we created a partnership with the Relational Schools Foundation and then later Cambridge Assessment to find out if the retention of trainee teachers, and as this research is a 5 longitudinal study, ultimately early career teachers, are affected by the strength and amount of relationships, social networks that they have during their training and early years of teaching. We started with our first cohort of trainee teachers in September 2017 and used sociomaps, Relational Schools proximity tool, and the Cambridge Personal Styles Questionnaire, as well as one-to-one interviews to assess the strength and number of relationships of trainee teachers at a key point in their training year. Then in September 2018, we had a greater number of trainees, approximately 120, involved in this study. And again, we used the relational proximity tool and the personal style questionnaire to assess the strength of their relationships with their peers, mentors, families, friends, and SCITT tutors in the first term. And so that's for this year, and we'll do it again next term. Essentially, we found that the number of relationships that a trainee has correlates to the outcome of the trainee. It doesn't matter who's in the social network, but it's the number of relationships that matter. And as this is a longitudinal study, our research will continue into year 3 and year 4 to ascertain if the same conclusion can be said of early career teachers. If early career teachers have an extensive social network, are they more likely to stay in the teaching profession? Over to you, Dr. Robbo.
Thank you very much. So first, I think it's important to recognise the importance of the socio-technical system that sits around a trainee or an early career teacher. I think it's important to recognise that and I would say this because I founded the Relational Schools project, we do believe there is something called a relational school. There is a series of systems or processes or pedagogies that enable relationships to flourish in one context or hinder them in another. So I don't think we should start from the premise that this is all at the feet of trainee teachers or even early career teachers. We must start from the premise that there is a good system out there that we ought to be striving for. And we ought to be striving that because we know that relationships protect, that there are certain conditions, as I said, that can hinder relationships if we don't get it right. But when we do get it right, we know that relationships can protect. And so the majority of our work to date, internationally across the UK, all the way to Australia, has been in the measurement of student-to-student relationships and student-to-teacher relationships. And what we've known for some time, actually, since the early 90s, if you go back to the work of Resnick in 93, we know that good relationships with a teacher, with peer group, should be a protective factor and predict a positive health risk outcomes. It should be able to predict academic outcomes as well. What we're seeing from the foundation are really large data sets is, irrespective of the context in which young people come from, whether they be context of material or relational deprivation, if they have one really good relationship with a peer and one really good relationship with a teacher, a student can begin to, in some circumstances, disconfirm the histories of the home. They can begin to thrive in the school. Their well-being is protected. So as we enter this project, we go into it with a view that relationships protect, but we know this is true of adults as well. And it was my hunch, as somebody who'd been a teacher and somebody who mentored trainees, that if we improve the quality of relationships around a trainee or an early career professional, we could also start to develop greater resilience within that group, recognising that resilience isn't primarily a thing, that we understand resilience as something between us and not necessarily within us. So I think it comes from a foundation, it comes from a premise, it comes from a hunch that we often see adults, particularly trainee teachers in this context, in the same way as we often look at students. We don't see them as individual, we often see them as cohorts of people, and there's an inherent danger in that. And the inherent danger is that we start to neglect the personal context from which trainees come, which in our world are just as important as the professional context they're about to enter into. So what we wanted to do in order to try and both direct resources appropriately in a time when budgets are stretched, but also to be able to identify these young people early in their career path, those who might be vulnerable to falling away or dropping out. There was a need to understand that if relationships matter, we need to understand and measure the personal social networks around the trainee teacher. We need to understand and measure the professional social networks around a teacher. We need to understand the quality of relationships within those networks. So as Kate suggests, it's both about the size of a social network, but it's also about its robustness, it's about its quality. So using our tool, the Relational Proximity Framework tool, which measures the distance in a relationship between individuals and groups, that's what we specialise in, the measurement of human relationships. We're as much interested in size as in the quality of the relationships that begin to form around a trainee. That said, it was quite clear to us as well, and if you look at a wide body of literature around predictive analytics, which is an emerging science, but something now embedded within universities in the States, in the UK and elsewhere. In order, as I said, to direct those resources effectively, in order to ensure that we've identified vulnerability early, we needed another tool that enabled us to both understand the context in which a trainee comes from, but also their own capabilities. And it was only really using a tool like CPSQ that gave us a window into a trainee's own personal capabilities and the likelihood they'd thrive. And so I think it's a great opportunity to hand over to you, Lynn, and perhaps take us through some of those things.
It's been great collaborating with you. Look forward to doing more of this.
Quite.
going to explain to you a little bit about the CPSQ. At the very start of the course, trainees answered the Cambridge Personal Styles Questionnaire, as we like to call it, the CPSQ. It asks questions which explores personal styles of working, coping with demands, and relating to others. Behavioural competencies or capabilities, all parties in this research felt were likely to be important to outcomes. What trainees did is they rated and ranked a large set of behavioural questions online. By doing this, it generated automatically a teacher's styles report. Trainees were given this report for their own self-reflection. They could decide whether they wanted to share it with their tutor or not, and tutors were given training in using and interpreting the reports. The report is one that we have been using in healthcare. So its behavioural competencies are called things like caring and compassion, self-management, coping with demands. And all these three areas I've just mentioned appear to be playing a role in retention and excellent performance in this particular project. These results are actually mirroring far larger research studies with teachers and within healthcare looking at doctors and nurses, which shows that personal styles can play a role in predicting important outcomes such as career interest, commitment, job satisfaction, retention, and performance. CPSQ was included in this project for three reasons: to understand the individual at the heart of the circles that Rob has described to you, understand individual trainees, their potential strengths, what areas for development that they bring with them, and how they are likely to interact and develop relationships with others. Could there be any barriers to that, any personal barriers we could help with? A second reason, these types of questionnaires are a very efficient way to identify potentially at-risk trainees, and then you can use that information to effectively target interventions. A big third reason is about relationships itself. This kind of tool, I work here in Cambridge Assessment as an internal coach, and I use psychometrics all the time to help fast track and facilitate relationships by creating a shared language between us, which is what we did between the trainee and tutor. Reports foster a more meaningful dialogue. So we're getting beyond how are you today, how did that module go? We're getting straight to the heart of the matter by offering a framework which can potentially open up difficult topics in a non-judgmental way. I'm now going to pass to Alison, who will tell you a little bit more about some of our key findings.
Okay, so I wanted to illustrate these as cohort 1 data, that's the first year of data that we had. And so we've got 97 participating trainees from the SCITT, School-Centred Teacher Training Provider. 54 had completed the CPSQ data. We had 68 completing both social maps in their first school placement. They have 2 school placements in the first placement and after the second placement. And we are going to be able to drop in some illustrations of those maps for what I'm just about to talk about so that you can see what they look like. And then 40 completing the relational proximity tool between the trainee and the tutor. So what I want to do is to share the findings through 2 sort of illustrative sort of pen portraits of 2 of the trainees, to sort of pick out some of those risk factors and protective factors and how they played out for those trainees in the settings that they were placed in during the course. So we've got 2 case studies that we're comparing. Both were career changes, which normally would be a protective factor from our data so far. Both males, which actually is showing as a risk factor from the data so far. Both staying locally, so living locally to where they had been living prior to the course, which again is a protective factor because they have a local personal network. Both had experience of working with children and young people. One had been working with young people through coaching in a football situation, and that's Tim. So I'm introducing Tim, who is a primary trainee, so he was trained to be a primary teacher. And Adrian, who had been working as a classroom assistant for a while in a school and had been recommended by his colleagues, you know, this is something you might want to continue doing. And he was working on the secondary programme. So Tim lived with a housemate, and living with a friend or living alone has actually shown up as a sort of risk factor. So, you know, a housemate might not be good enough, you know, in terms of offering that sort of day-to-day support. Whereas Adrian lived with partner and children. Now we've noticed from the data that up to the age of 35, that can be a challenge as people go through the programme and are juggling sort of young children's lives as well as their own. But Adrian was older than 35, so it should have been a protected factor. He lived with a sort of strong family unit. But both suffered bereavements during their course, which is not atypical. And this is one of the sort of critical incidents that sort of challenged their support networks. Tim, this was our football coach in the primary setting, completed and met all expectations of the course. Adrian didn't. And so I just wanted to sort of illustrate what that might be to do with in terms of the data that we've been able to collect. Both started with small networks, so we were talking about the size of network being important. So both started, although they had local networks, which was good, they had quite less than 30 sort of people in their network. So that's a risk factor we've identified. So why the difference? So for Tim, who completed, he tried to start keeping his personal and professional life separately. He thought this was the way to go into the profession. And so he wanted to, and we decided that that's showing up as a risk in the data. He also found himself quite soon quite busy, as you'll appreciate, too busy to keep in touch with his original network. And we've noticed this in quite a lot of the data as being a real risk. But he turned both of them around, and it was this sort of bereavement that really triggered for him a sort of rethinking about his relationships. So, and partly that was to do with his own proactivity, so partly was to do with him, partly to do with the support he was given. So he first of all realised that the value of humour and friendship. And one of the things that's also struck us from the data is the role of these sort of unsung heroes within school placement. People like the teaching assistants keep popping up, classroom assistants who've got that extra time, a different role, but also other staff. And he started to sort of use them and as a sort of, I want to come to work because I want to be with these people. And then he started to talk professionally with them and personally, and starting to mix those two parts of his network was the sort of thing that really kept him going at a time when he was starting to think, I need to leave the course. I'm finding this too challenging because my personal life is challenging me professionally. And he found and kept a group of close peers on the course. And I think that's coming out as a feature of if you can see these sort of relationships of people in your own situation through, they could be quite long-standing friends, and we're hoping to track that into their first roles. He'd also stopped, as we were saying, he was too busy, stopped going to the football club. He stopped sort of, I can't attend the coaching, I can't. And he realised that he actually had to make a decision. And the decision he made sounded a bit counterproductive. It sounded like, you know, I've chosen to go back to football and that's really important in my life, which could have set him against sort of saying, you know, my private life is more important than my work, my professional life. But actually he managed to merge the two. And more, and he's actually in a placement at the moment, and he's coaching at school, he's coaching at home, he's talking to people at work about his personal life, and people in his personal life who are teachers or have things to say about his profession. And he's merging, and he's become committed to the profession. He's got an identity that suits him, that treats him as a holistic person. And it was shown up in his CPSQ data that he had high caring and compassion, so people were already important to him. He just had to find a way of recognising that in his personal and professional life. And he also had a high coping score, and those two things have come out of the CPSQ data as really good predictive factors to look out for. He also had really strong alignment between himself and the tutor on both, so that was on both sides, that there was a really powerful relationship that saw him to manage these relationships and get through this challenge. So when we've seen that Adrian had quite a lot of the same protective factors, why did Adrian leave? He was a career changer, previous experience in school, stayed local with his partner and family. Similarly small starting network, and he similarly suffered a bereavement. But he had, the factors were sort of again, personal and to do with the context. And to do with the context, in his first school, he felt really welcoming. He had loads of people that he could draw on, and they let him try anything in the classrooms, which he thought was really supportive. But the school was actually quite challenging as a context, and the rest of the school couldn't really offer him the challenge that he needed to lift his practice, and challenge his practice and reflect. And that meant that the role of the tutor and being the provider was really important. But when we looked at the relational proximity tool, we found a real imbalance between the quality of the relationship between the tutor and Adrian. Adrian thought he was having, it's a great relationship. The tutor was incredibly frustrated at the sort of lack of a commitment to challenging himself and raising his practice. He was sort of good, it's good enough. My colleagues are really happy. But actually in that placement, they were really happy that he was going in and teaching the children. So that's, the school was quite, and the school, the SCITT provider knew this. So in the second placement, they knew that they needed a placement that was going to be able to support him in really challenging and thinking more critically, reflecting on his practice. However, it came at a time when he hadn't made strong connections with people on the course, with the peers. He hadn't made strong connections with other colleagues in that second placement, because he found his next placement a real surprise. He thought he was doing great. He thought this was, quite easy, a profession to come into, and he was managing to keep personal and private, personal and professional very separate. But he didn't extend his network, he didn't merge his lives, and he actually looked at the CPSQ data, and he had a very low coping set of data there, and he had this imbalance with his training. So actually the quality of the relationships and his ability to cope with pressure, he hadn't got the personal capacity, and he wasn't using the resources available to him. He started to take time out due to ill health. He just sort of withdrew himself. And with further failing health in his family to deal with, he has withdrawn from teaching. So I guess, these are two pen portraits that cover a lot of the protective and risk factors and some of the key strategies. But over to you, Lynn.
Okay.
Get on with the discussion.
Thank you, Alison, for conveying some of our key results to people. All the partners in this collaboration have presented their part in the project, and we're now ready to take questions. If you're watching on replay, please keep posting comments and asking questions, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. We want to keep the conversation going. I'm going to start. I've got a question coming in, and I'm just having a look at it here. We're receiving a number of questions on how is this rich data being used by the SCITT. So I'm going to ask Kate if she could answer that.
Yeah, okay, thanks Lynn. I think there's probably 5 key things that we've done. So one of them is the allocation of trainees to tutors. So we've thought about, now with this extra data that we've got, whether or not they may be at risk for various reasons. So whether that may be that they're isolated geographically, that they have a low social network, or that there may be career changes, or that the personal styles questionnaires revealed that they might be low in coping with demands or self-management. So we've sort of made sure that we do that we match up tutors in a much more informed way perhaps than we did previously. Well, and then akin to that is the allocation of schools to trainees. Because we're gaining more information about them at the beginning of the course, we're now able to sort of think about maybe more about the ethos of the school that might be appropriate for them, maybe the location of the school, the type of school, from a secondary context, whether it should be 11 to 16 or it should be an 11 to 18 school, because they've expressed interest in wanting to teach A-level stuff. And then this information about the strength of the social networks has also allowed us to think about how we might change the conversations that we have very early on. So now our SCITT tutors visit in the first 2 weeks of the first term. So in September, they went in and visited. And now what we do is we ask questions specifically about their personal context. So do you have caring responsibilities with children or relatives? Do you live at home with your family? Do you feel that you have a support network, and who is in that network? So we do that in September now. And then this type of information has proved invaluable to the SCITT tutors. And now also an extension of that is we now think about the type of conversation that we have. So if we know that we've got a trainee who has got a low score of coping with demands, but has also got a sort of small social network, when we go in and have some of those sort of challenging, difficult conversations, we're aware of that, and we might sort of approach it from a slightly different angle, and then we do some more pastoral stuff, which is like a phone call the next day, flag up to the mentor explicitly that, you know, we've had this slightly challenging conversation, you know, the trainee needs a bit of support, they need to sort of have a rant about us or something, well, because they can't go home and talk that through. And then we've done, and then just sort of a couple more, only briefly. So I've just haven't think about it. But so another one we've done is we've shared trainee CVs with their school mentors, because we've got a significant percentage of our trainees are career changers. And I think it's really important for the mentors to know that these trainees have been highly skilled in other areas. Obviously, the skills are transferable to teaching, but many of these career changes are novices in the education world. So that the mentors need to recognise that obviously they've had other skills and responsibilities, and that has really helped to broker that relationship. And then obviously, I think the last thing that I want to talk about is it's led us to think about, you know, building, well, not our term, but a term of mosaic mentoring across our partnership, about the fact that actually beginning to, you know, because we know this information about the trainees now, about you know, suggesting to mentors that it doesn't all the information, all the support doesn't have to come from just them, that actually it may just be one mentor has a mentor meeting, but actually the trainees are encouraged to go and seek support and advice. It could be about behaviour management, it could be about assessment for learning, it could be about, you know, other issues. You know, they might have an interest in SEN or something like that, and their special educational needs, and they could go and talk and use those, you know, sort of wider network of people to help them and support them, who are not just casual, but who actually feel that they have a formal role. And I think all of this, we've done all of this, you know, in partnership with our placement schools, because obviously we're all about, and the schools as well, about trying to create confident and resilient training teachers to become MQTs.
Can I just come in there and just, there's two things that's really important to observe. Number one, thank you both. Alison, there was just something you said, which I think is really important just to tease out. And one of the things you said was, again, it's a protective factor, and you were pointing to people living locally to the network around them, as if it's a sort of an assumed thing, as if it's a recognised, everyone knows that living close to people who you know, who care for you, who look out for you, is something that teacher training providers internationally all do as standard core practice. And I think that led on to what you were saying, Kate, which is actually this has been a process of making the invisible things around a trainee tangible. You can see them, hold on to them, and do things with them, do things about them. And you know, I'm thinking about the way we measure relationships, and we say that 5 things are really, really key that you have as we measure, and our surveys measure across 5 domains, that they are, that you have bags and bags of face-to-face communication. And it's really important that you can't, as good as technology is at mediating relationships, it will never replace good face-to-face communication. Social neuroscience tells us that we need that immediacy of contact with people. Secondly, that you need some sort of continuity to that relationship, a rooted sense of where it's come from. So it's important that you're around people you've known for a long time and trust and rely on, but also the new people you bump into, a projected sense of where that relationship's going, and that you invest time in that. So it is important that you don't drop your personal network around you, that the clubs and societies that have been your lifeblood must continue to be that lifeblood. Cutting it off can be catastrophic. Thirdly, that you need what we call a multiplexity relationship, that there are many strands to a relationship. So one of the things that you just referenced there, Kate, is you know, best practice now for you is giving tutors or mentors CVs of people. And that reflects the need to know stuff about people.
Yeah.
The more we say,
Understand the individual.
right, we say it's a
Yeah.
multiplexity relationship because it's like many strands, like a rope. The more you know about somebody, the more context you know them in, the more strength there will be in that strand of a relationship. That's why that activity is really, really important. But there must be a parity to the relationship. So one of the things that you pointed out in your pen picks, brilliant pen picks, Alison, was this sense that in some instances there's this mismatch between a relationship. There's a perception on one side of it and the other, but it's not shared. There's not an equality to that relationship. They both think something different about it, and it points to our fifth domain, that of commonality. You know, unless you have shared goals and shared vision, shared values, you're likely to actually be bumping around with strangers and never really getting to know them. But it's that process of unearthing that, uncovering it, as I said, making the invisible things tangible, that then leads to direct action, which makes a huge difference.
Yes.
I mean, trainees are now not dropping out at the same rate that they were. This has been powerful.
And you know, we know more information about them. We
Yeah.
can very
Understand
beginning
them.
and can make some specific interventions. Because those are the generic ones that we've
You
done.
can tailor to the individual.
Personalised ones, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I just want to say, I mean, we're getting viewers here from Brazil, Madrid, Tasmania, and Gigi from Spain said, a mentor to discuss problems would have made her teacher training better.
Yeah. But it's also not about just problems, it's also about the positives as well. Because actually, if you haven't got, you know, you need somebody, you know, that you can say, wow, that lesson went really well today. And they're like, I know, because you did X, Y, and Z. You know, the probing questions that I asked you, the pace that I asked you, it's all there. And it's those positives as well. It's not just about, you know, somebody who understands how hard you've been working and the feedback that you've been given. And it's having somebody to celebrate those successes with, as well as being, well, what do I do with that, you know, year 8 class?
Recognise you, be a bit of a cheerleader sometimes in your corner.
And as you watch this back, one of the things we'll do, as Alison said, is we'll drop in some of those visuals, we'll drop into those sociomaps and see how we did this. One of the key things we did was try to identify within that map both the trainee teachers' personal and professional networks. So I take the questions point, Gigi, I take that point that it's great to have a mentor, but what we found, it's not just great to have a mentor, it's great to have a mentor with professional skills and capabilities who is also somebody you can go to personally because you want to talk to them because you know them. Equally, it's really good to have people within your own personal network sometimes who have those professional skills. They're mums or dads or their sisters or brothers who've been a teaching assistant or a teacher themselves.
I'm going to bring in Verity, one of you, Verity in the UK asks, if your case studies lived with other teachers or those of different professions, she found it very helpful to live with fellow teachers who could give relevant advice.
It is, and it's about that network, isn't it? It's about, and you know, drawing on your point, Rob, I think that's the whole point about the mosaic mentoring as well, because actually you can feel that the mentor has an assessment role in your life, and that actually what would be better is for actually them to have, you know, another person that they could go to, who they could perhaps talk to professionally, which is where that point, you know, that Verity's point, about actually having other people to seek that advice from, because there's no doubt that the mentor has to write reports and stuff, and you can feel that they have an assessment role. And that's where I think the mosaic mentoring helps to expand that.
I think we found from the maps that the links that Verity's talking about there can be found anywhere.
Yes.
So one can compensate for another. So if you don't live with a partner who is a teacher or got any teaching background, you can find it through some family friends, or you can find, you know, if you're struggling to find sort of local contact with people from your personal network, you can find that, you know, from your professional network.
Yes.
And that this mentor, that's what's really come out of the social maps, because we have got different segments which pick out, you know, who was the mentor who seemed to have the formal role. Many people put more than one person, which is interesting. And some of that was managed, some of that was their sort of perceptions of people who'd stepped into the role. But this other sort of segment of other professionals, including administrative staff, seem to be these sort of unsung heroes, this resource, which trainees are going and finding, and also the schools are offering the generosity of those. And I think it goes back to your commitment. There are people committed to the profession in schools already who are committed to the bringing on of new professionals who don't see them as a sort of ephemeral person coming in and out. They'll only be here a few weeks. They're committing to helping them with, my experience about behaviour management, or my experiences, of being a trainee. Some of them are going, I was on that programme quite recently.
Yes.
And so they're mentoring, because they personally connected. And I think that chemistry, the resources that people are finding from wherever.
I think there's a broader point here for people listening as well. This is not just about trainees necessarily in their training context. So often when we're talking about the types of network you need around you, we often make even career decisions with other priorities in mind. We think about the salary, we think about the promotion opportunity, we think about the type of organisation and institution we ideally want to work for. But sometimes that dislocates us from our rooted networks that actually have encouraged us to thrive in one context versus the other. So there's a broader point here about, in life, who do you need around you in order to thrive and flourish? And they tend to be people who get you, who know you, who are invested in that relationship with you, which brings us back to Verity's point, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I've got another question coming in. Apart from the risk factors and the 2 case studies that you mentioned, Alison, did you find anything else made a difference to leaving the course?
Well, I think I was able to cover quite a few of the risk and protective factors, and they will go up on the slides to be illustrated with Tim and Adrian's situation. But I wondered, Lynn, whether you wanted to talk about that other vulnerable subgroup that we've identified, of these high achievers. So we've got some data that comes in, some dislocation, talking about in there's CPSQ data that's playing out and needs management and support, if you can identify them early.
Absolutely. This is a group that are too tough on themselves. So we've got this profile of person coming out, a sort of subgroup of people who have been withdrawing from the course, who are actually sort of perfect people who want to stay. So they're highly conscientious, they're ambitious, they want to achieve high standards with the work, they're always pushing themselves, but we're finding that on their coping score it's actually low. So they're actually self-reporting that they tend to prone to self-doubt, particularly if they have a setback or a mistake, is they're going to dwell on that. So this particular profile together, someone who wants to achieve high standards, can beat themselves up if they don't achieve their possibly self-imposed high standards, then they're using avoidant coping, they're withdrawing. So that's something that may be...
And also withdrawing from their network. So before they withdraw from the course, they then withdraw. They are some of the people that I remember from the interviews of who were withdrawing from their personal... I'm too busy. I can't talk to you. I'm sorry, Mum. I can't phone you. And so their network was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and so they're becoming more and more vulnerable.
So they're like
overstriving.
How do you... It's like overstriving and then withdraw from other people. We've got large researchers that find this. We can call it unrealistic perfectionism, maladaptive perfectionism. There are papers on it. You can Google it. One of the strategies to cope is to withdraw, it's to avoid, to become avoidant. And it sounds like we're picking up that they're then distancing themselves from the people who could help them.
So this sociomapping, it forms part of the professional conversation, can reveal sort of that in a non-judgmental, non-threatening way.
I mean, because anecdotally, we've always said to trainees, don't withdraw from the drama group, don't withdraw from the football and sports and stuff, because actually you still need that network. But actually, key points of the term, they just do that. They do that. I'm too busy, and you just know that that's not going to be supportive for them. So it's great to actually have the sociomaps and the data that we now have to actually be able to and to actually really be able to build up a profile of the type of trainees where we can make some interventions with.
And going back to Rob's point about that holistic person, that somebody who wants to commit to the profession has to make sense of their personal and professional lives. And if that can be accommodated, then great, they can see a future for themselves, their family, their friends, it all becomes one.
That's a great question. We'll say, people who are watching, if you're watching this on replay and you've got questions, just please do leave us comments, and we are all really willing to come back to you and to engage in the debate long after this live event is over.
And we've got another question coming in. Okay, here we go. It's how much of the issues are to do with the characteristics and approach the trainees, and how much are to do with those on the course and in the school placements. I'm going to start with Alison on this.
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a lot of this, but it'd be nice to summarise some of the key things. So if I talk about the sort of trainee perspective, I guess, because things can be done on both sides. But I think trainees can be sort of consciously and unapologetically, unapologetic about seeking personal. We had so many people, particularly males in the cohort, that were saying, that they wanted to try and keep their lives separate. But actually, we just explored how that it can work, but it's leaving yourself vulnerable to having the conversations when you need them, which we've illustrated today. And that's acceptable and that's usual in the teaching profession. The teaching profession, as many of the caring professions, are about you as a holistic person, working-based life, life-based work.
Yeah, the spillover, both ways.
And the work is emotional, and it has an impact on your wider life. So we all need, as you were saying, this social, emotional support. But what the training offers is a chance to build a professional network, and it's how trainees go in and whether they're explicit and conscious and up for that, and have the skills and to build that professional network, which could see them, with all sorts of ties and connections. We've got people from this year meeting their tutors and mentors from last year for coffee. We've got peers that could be. Well, we've been in the teaching profession. We have long-term relationships that are built and become a complex relationship. And what I didn't mention about Tim, for example, was as his commitment to the profession grew, he started making external connections. So we've got a segment on the maps. He started joining teacher forums. He started to open himself up to what else is known about teaching and what can I use and bring in and share with colleagues. And so, I think there's a lot trainees can do, but there's also a lot you've been talking about, Kate, about what schools and placements and the provider can do.
Yeah, so I think it's just about having those explicit conversations and finding out more about the trainee when they enter the profession. And I think that actually that's something that has to happen as NQTs and early career teachers. Just, everybody's different, and time has to be put aside for the, if you're talking about NQTs and early career teachers, to build up a relationship with the mentor. But equally for the placements, the employing schools at that point, the employing schools, be really explicit to them about the sort of organisational structure of the school, just the hierarchy, for example, if the head of department wants a data drop, actually this head of department, you've got 2 days grace, do you know what I mean, kind of thing. And it's absolutely knowing those explicit things that I think early career teachers and NQTs need to have. And again, that might be 2 different people. So it might be, the head of department does the sort of official kind of introduction, this is what we do, but then there is a member of staff who is, they're sort of, part of that mosaic mentoring co-mentor, who is actually the person that they can go to and ask the stupid questions. Do you know what I mean? And because I think explicitly there's not enough stuff that we can do to help sort of ring round and give that whole kind of ring of support around early career teachers. And schools are doing it, of course they are, but I think it's just making things a little bit more explicit and obviously repeating it over
and
time.
if the schools can value these other professionals who are not in any formal role, who are giving of themselves to these new recruits to the profession, or if that was valued, it doesn't have to be a status.
No.
It's just the culture of the school. It's got the settings to
I'm
value
thinking
relationships.
Rob, would you like to comment on?
No, I think we've covered it. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Right.
Good.
Oh, right. We have another question coming in. Please keep your questions coming. Luke asks if you've seen any evidence of over-mentoring where trainees feel overwhelmed with too much help.
Yes, something that we started to acknowledge actually. We've now, some of our tutors now actually say, so when you do like the lesson feedback, it can be slightly overwhelming. And depending upon, that whole sort of idea of that cognitive load, how much you can take in. So our tutors now explicitly say to the trainees, do you want us to actually give you feedback, or do you want to read it like written feedback, or do you just want a short summary? And to allow the sort of trainee to kind of have ownership of that. And that whole idea about over-mentoring, where actually, trainees can be sort of feel like they're almost micromanaged, and then their mentor because they want to be supportive. They don't want them to feel, have that terrible moment, in a year 10 class where they just sort of have run out of work, and ideas in the class, and they don't know what to do next, and the mentor sort of stands up and intervenes. Do you know what I mean? And the trainee standing there going, well, that's sort of over mentoring, and then to come up with the best coach. And and I think that is an issue, and it is a thing, and there's no fix around it apart from if we're valuing relationships, it's about talking about it, isn't it?
Absolutely, I'm going to tee myself
Yeah.
up, and understanding the individual trainee and what works for them. Using tools like CPSQ to get that rapport and meaningful dialogue going, so you can understand people at a kind of deeper level and what's going to work for them, and open up that conversation between you.
Yes, and I think this speaks to, it's a really great question, Luke. I think this really speaks to the reasons we measure relationship here in this context, and why we specifically focused on the tutor and mentor relationship first with trainee, because when we try to measure relationship, I think we need to acknowledge very quickly that the degree to which you like somebody is not illustrative of the quality of relationship. We understand relationship as the degree to which you know somebody, and knowing somebody really well, knowing the things that create anxiety in them, the things that are going to actually undermine confidence. They're the things, therefore, that enable you, give you permission as mentor to withdraw slightly. But I think the cases of over-mentoring often come where there's a lack of knowledge and understanding between two individuals, which is why it's been such an
They
important
haven't got a deep enough relationship there. So they've got that rapport to talk about what I need from you, rather than being overwhelmed.
And so therefore, in our diagnostic tool, what we bring to the table here is, again, Alison used this phrase, it's permission and a language to be able to unpack the way that
sharing a
relationship
language
is
you
working.
can talk together with.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to remind replay viewers for questions and sharing their own experiences. Please keep it coming, even in replay.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder as well that we're year 2 of this project, and it's been the most amazing partnership with Suffolk Norfolk SCITT, and we're so grateful for you commissioning the research. But we only start to make policy difference when there are larger statistical numbers. The people we work with who do data tell me it's over 1,000, and that's when it starts to get really exciting. And for that reason, we're really excited that at least 3 teacher training providers are now starting to talk to us following our live event here at Cambridge.
We had a seminar here.
Indeed, 2 weeks ago. But we are really, really keen to engage with training providers internationally to come on board with this research and to give us that greater pool of evidence that starts to change not just the practice, and it has significantly changed the practice of one provider, but every provider, because there are lessons to be learned and shared across sectors as well as within the sector.
Yeah, join in, give us your data so we can find out more.
I think it's just not about, us being at SCITT. I think, it's about working in ITT, and I think a lot of the issues that I've talked about, the relationships with mentors and some of the things that we've done about being more explicit in some of our conversations and the way that we support via phone calls and sharing CVs and stuff. It's not the fact that we're a school-centred initial teacher training provider that has anything to do with that. Do you know what I mean? That's actually just building that relationship and sharing information. And as you say, giving permission for people to engage at that level and use that information, whether they're from a, whatever type of ITT course that they're running. And I think it's just, we wouldn't want anyone to think that just the points that we've been talking about, that just because we're a SCITT.
That's a really good point. It's very important to remind people that the lessons we're learning about, just thinking back to the previous viewer's question around mentoring and practice of mentoring and approaches to mentoring, well, they're applicable well into one's early career and the types of support and coaching you receive even as a senior leader. These kinds of relationships we need professionally are not exclusive to the training experience. And so you're right, it's wrong for if you're out there thinking, well, this organisation is not like us, You know, we don't live in the east of England. We're in a different urban context here. We're an international provider, so we're very different. We're a HEI. We run a very different sort of program. Well, we really do believe that there are transferable, applicable lessons being learned from this research that many.
Actually,
sure a lot of
the
it
profession, as you say,
is.
we lose so many teachers in those first 5 years, particularly. So supporting them. There is formal mentoring that's taking them now in England and well through that sort of first year in a new early career framework. But how's that going to work beyond that first year? What advice are we going to be giving to mentors who are committing to helping people within their career journey and supporting them on different issues about where their career journey is going back to some of your motivations.
Yes.
How are we going to help them on?
And so just to reiterate, we've got conversations starting with local providers here in Cambridge, and with providers all the way up into Lincolnshire and Bradford, and we as a foundation have been working for many years now in Australia. We're really interested in growing that group and types of provider to be part of this research. So come and join us.
Yes, that's our big message. Join us. Do you have? Yeah, please, Alison.
Well, I was just thinking about that sort of early career provision and how life can happen to you and challenge you at any time, and also the decisions about where you and your family or lack of family, moving to, we all have changes in our circumstances as we work, and so it's how our workplace is going to get to know us, how our workplace is going to get to know us in a way that they can understand some of the vulnerabilities we've talked about. There's a very special responsibility of a training provider in school placements, but how our employers going to be. They've got the potential to use this information as well to support people, in their early careers, but beyond us.
Oh, absolutely. I say that this also generalises into an area I work more in, which is healthcare, and certainly you've got trainee doctors where they're sort of their placements, their foundation years in the NHS, they could be away from family and friends. So the sort of learning we're getting here would transfer certainly into healthcare. Very useful about supporting trainee doctors, say, in their foundation years. That has actually just occurred to me.
Yes, and the next steps of this research. So actually, Kate and I are meeting after this event. To start and talk about where we're going now.
Yeah.
We've already set this up as a 5-year longitudinal study, not just to change the internal practices and processes of one provider, but also to continue to engage with the teachers long after they've left your course to see where they end up. So I was privileged enough to study a 3-year degree here at Cambridge and then study on the PhD course here, which is one way of entering the profession. Your way is a different way. My wife trained as a primary school teacher on a 4-year BEd program here, which is 4 years in the profession, and in the 5th year you're in your NQT year. Now, what was distinctive about those pathways, that particularly for my wife, when she entered that 5th year of teaching, as it was, that was actually her first NQT year. She was really embedded within the profession. And what we're hoping is the types of skills, capacities, capabilities we're encouraging in the trainees through this process. Because I think it's important to say that you can't, when in this debate about what's more important, is it about capabilities or is it about context? Is it about the school, is it about the mentor, is it about the training provider? It's important to note that relationships are everywhere. The relationship experience day in, day out are making some sort of difference. They're modelled and you are changed by them. So we're hoping that these capacities, capabilities developed in all these contexts is actually going to lead to longitudinal outcomes. These are teachers who will have learned relationship management better and therefore will stay. And which is why we're going to be following and tracking these trainees to their fifth year
We interact with our environments, with the people that we meet. It's that kind of negotiation.
But it's like everything, isn't it? It's about making it explicit, but also having a language to label it with, because actually, through the questionnaires, that you've been doing, actually being able to understand, actually, I do struggle with coping with demands. Do you know what I mean? I do struggle with self-articulating, and it gives a language, because otherwise you're sort of struggling with the kind of like, well, I really struggle with kind of pressure and timelines and stuff, but actually coping with demand sort of summarises it. And it's also being aware of the fact that actually it's making it explicit, like the strength of their relationships can change. So already, when we've looked at the socio maps again already this academic year, when I was walking around and the trainees were doing it, you could see that they were taking people off and adding people on, and you're like, well, that's exactly what you wanted to happen. So they're actually explicitly thinking it through and being reflective about it. And when they go into their future career, they've got the labels and also the language, and actually know that it's important because we've made it important. You've come and spoken to them, etc., and we've raised the profile of
options as well, doesn't it? They've got the language, they've made it explicit, but it's also given people. So it's very empowering to be given the options. If something happens, it's this part of my network. I can compensate. And we've got examples of that we can share to say, this is perfectly normal. This is it's not something to be worried or concerned or apologise.
That's true.
It's why when going for an interview for your first job, it is definitely a two-way process. I was always taught as a trainee that you are as much interviewing the school because you've got to assess the degree to which this is a place where relationships are going to be there for you, a place that you can embed, be happy, professional relationships that are going to reinforce and nurture your practice, not just is it a good school, what is the salary like.
Have they read your CV and have they used it to get to know you so that you're not a blank slate.
Right. To get to know you as a person.
What can you bring?
It's interesting. One feedback we've got from our online seminar, and this is sort of going back to the assessment component of it and the relationships and the personal styles and something. It's really good to know using the assessment. They've taken my gut instincts and they've confirmed them.
Yeah.
So what we're doing there is helping to confirm.
Yes, and ultimately, and ultimately, we also know that we can't remove that vulnerability. Those risk factors are inherent. What we've been trying to do here through a joined-up process is create ostensibly one predictive analytic that can say, where is that vulnerability? Where can we target it? How can we support? At a time when, as I acknowledged earlier, resources are thinner than they were, we know that, but also the types of support and provision that you need to provide for an individual are also tailor-made and need to be tailor-made to them. So this is about where to direct your resources, when to direct them. And I think we just can't reiterate enough, the impact has been that trainees have not been leaving at the rates they were.
And having explicit conversations and being able to use the language to articulate their strength of their relationships and the reason why they're struggling with X, Y, and Z.
So they're less likely to actually leave as they go into the profession. So it's not just achieving the course, it's actually they're really committed and they have a strong sense of who they're with in the profession, where their resources are. And
tools to express themselves and get across their needs, what they need. Instead of, I know you mentioned it, meetings we've had earlier about when people leave, and you just why, you're not quite sure. Now we're able to track that and get a better understanding of the factors involved in that decision.
And put that support in place long before that vulnerability has come to the surface.
Absolutely. Well, we've come to the end now, coming up to the end. I don't know if there's any further comment you'd like to make.
No, all I'd like to say, I think, is that teaching is a great profession. So even though we've been talking about, even though I was a teacher for 18 years, and now I run a teacher training course, and I just don't, even though we might have been sounding a little bit like, you have to have relationships to do this, don't worry about it, just become a teacher if that's what you want to do. It's a great profession. You will never have, every day is different, you'll never have so much fun and laughter as you do as being a teacher.
And we've met so many great people in the profession that are there, ready to welcome new teachers and grow with them, learn from them, live with them.
Yes.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, my collaborators and partners. We're going to be doing another Facebook Live session probably around about October time to continue to share our findings with the project and observations. Also look out for our blogs, podcasts, and other information we'll be using to keep you up to date, but also to have a dialogue with you. We want your ideas. And you can find out more about what we're up to on the Cambridge Assessment's website, social media channels, the Relationships Foundation as well on their website, Suffolk and Norfolk SCITT, Alison. We will be broadcasting on our channels so you know when you can have more contact with us. Please come and put more questions to us. We're dying to have a dialogue with you. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.